film about a half frog, half robot who attacks innocent flies?
That's the one. Oh!
You think you remember every Disney cartoon from your childhood? Nah, fam. There's a whole vault of Disney shows that somehow got completely erased from your memory, and it's not because they were bad. It's because Disney buried them so deep that most people genuinely forgot they ever existed. I'm talking about shows that had cult followings, unique animation styles that Disney never tried again, and storylines that pushed boundaries way beyond what you'd expect from the House of Mouse. Some of these cartoons were so different from typical Disney content that they feel like they came from a completely different studio. The craziest part? A few were actually successful, but got axed for reasons so bizarre that it sounds like conspiracy theory. The Weekenders. Let me start with something that's going to make you question your memory. The Weekenders ran for 4 seasons on Disney's One Saturday Morning, had 76 episodes, and somehow completely vanished from collective consciousness like it never existed. This show was actually groundbreaking because it dealt with realistic teenage problems instead of fantasy adventures, and Disney quietly buried it because it was too relatable and not magical enough for their brand. Here's what made The Weekenders special. It showed kids dealing with actual issues like divorced parents, social anxiety, peer pressure, and the awkwardness of adolescence without any Disney magic to fix everything. The main character, Tino, had genuine anxiety disorders. Carver dealt with being the only black kid in his friend group, and Lore struggled with anger management issues. This was real representation that Disney had never attempted before. But here's where it gets twisted. The show was too realistic for Disney's comfort. Episodes dealt with topics like parents dating after divorce, kids feeling left out of social groups, and the pressure to fit in during middle school. There were no fairy godmothers, talking animals, or magical solutions. Kids had to work through their problems using actual communication and emotional intelligence. The animation style was also completely different from anything Disney had done. It was quirky, stylized, and had an indie comic book feel that didn't match Disney's polished aesthetic. The characters changed outfits every episode, had realistic body proportions, and looked like actual teenagers instead of idealized cartoon versions. Disney executives started getting uncomfortable when the show began winning awards for its honest portrayal of adolescence and realistic character development. They realized that The Weekenders was making their other shows look shallow and unrealistic by comparison. The show was quietly canceled despite strong ratings because it didn't fit the Disney formula of fantasy escapism and magical problem solving. But here's where it gets even weirder. Disney has actively avoided putting The Weekenders on streaming platforms or releasing it on DVD, almost like they're embarrassed that they made something so grounded and realistic. It's been completely erased from Disney's official history. Gargoyles. This is going to blow your mind. Disney actually made a dark fantasy horror series that dealt with themes like genocide, police corruption, corporate conspiracy, and moral ambiguity. And it somehow aired during their afternoon programming block for 3 years. Gargoyles was so unlike anything Disney had ever produced that most people can't believe it was actually a Disney show. Here's how insane this series was. The main characters were ancient stone creatures who came to life at night to protect New York City from supernatural threats and human corruption. But this wasn't kid-friendly adventure stuff. We're talking about storylines involving mass murder, political assassination, domestic abuse, and characters struggling with immortality and loss. The show had body counts, graphic violence, and psychological horror that would make modern Netflix shows look tame. The most twisted part? The series was created by Greg Weisman, who convinced Disney executives to let him make what was essentially a primetime adult drama disguised as a children's cartoon. The show dealt with complex themes like redemption, sacrifice, and the consequences of violence in ways that were way too sophisticated for Disney's target demographic. Episodes featured characters dying permanently, villains who were genuinely terrifying, and moral dilemmas that didn't have clear good and evil solutions. There were storylines about genetic experimentation, corporate warfare, and ancient curses that had real psychological consequences for the characters. This was Game of Thrones level complexity wrapped in animation. But here's where Disney started freaking out. Parents began complaining that the show was giving their kids nightmares and dealing with topics that were too mature for afternoon television. The series was also attracting a huge adult fan base who were analyzing the show's mythology and creating fan theories that were more complex than Disney was comfortable with. The network executives realized they had accidentally created something that was more suited for late-night cable than Disney Channel, and they quietly moved it to less prominent time slots before eventually canceling it. The show's dark tone and mature themes were completely at odds with Disney's family-friendly brand image. Disney has since treated gargoyles like a weird experiment they'd rather forget, rarely acknowledging its existence and making it extremely difficult to watch through official channels. Lloyd in Space. Okay, this one's gonna mess with your head because Lloyd in Space was genuinely one of the weirdest things Disney ever produced, and it got buried because it was too strange and experimental for mainstream audiences. The show was basically a surreal sci-fi sitcom that felt more like something from Adult Swim than Disney Channel. Here's how bizarre this show was. It followed a green alien teenager named Lloyd navigating adolescence in outer space. But the humor was so weird and abstract that kids didn't get the jokes, and adults were confused about who the target audience was supposed to be. The show dealt with typical teenage problems, but set them in such a bizarre alien context that everything felt like a fever dream. The animation style was deliberately ugly and off-putting, with character designs that looked like they were drawn by someone having a psychotic break. Lloyd himself was this awkward, neurotic alien who constantly broke the fourth wall and made references to things that were way over children's heads. The show's humor was dry, sarcastic, and often involved meta-commentary about television and pop culture. But here's where it gets really twisted. The show's creator was intentionally trying to make something that would confuse and alienate mainstream Disney audiences. He wanted to create something subversive that would appeal to weird kids and adults who appreciated abstract humor, but Disney didn't realize how unmarketable this would be. Episodes featured surreal plot lines like Lloyd's family getting addicted to reality TV, alien teenagers dealing with existential crises, and storylines that made no logical sense but somehow worked as absurdist comedy. The show was too weird for kids, too childish for adults, and too experimental for Disney's brand. The network executives had no idea how to market Lloyd in Space because it didn't fit any existing categories. It wasn't educational, it wasn't traditionally funny, and it wasn't inspiring or uplifting. It was just weird. Disney quietly canceled it after one season and pretended it never happened. The show has become a cult classic among people who remember it, but Disney has made no effort to preserve or promote it because they still don't understand what they accidentally created. American Dragon, Jake Long. This is gonna shock you, but Disney actually made a show centered around urban culture, hip-hop music, and Asian American identity that was so successful they made 2 seasons, then buried it completely because it didn't fit their wholesome image. American Dragon, Jake Long was groundbreaking representation that Disney now acts like never existed. Here's what made this show revolutionary. Jake was a Chinese-American teenager living in New York who could transform into a dragon to protect magical creatures from evil forces, but the show was steeped in authentic urban culture, featuring hip-hop soundtracks, graffiti art aesthetics, and storylines that dealt with racism, cultural identity, and growing up in diverse communities. The first season had this incredible animation style that looked like moving graffiti art, with character designs that were influenced by street art and urban fashion. Jake spoke in actual teen slang. The show featured real hip-hop artists, and the storylines addressed issues like cultural assimilation and feeling caught between two worlds. But here's where Disney started getting uncomfortable. The show was too authentically urban for their comfort zone. Parents in certain demographics complained that the show was promoting inappropriate culture, and Disney executives worried that the hip-hop influences and urban setting didn't align with their family-friendly brand image. The most twisted part? Disney completely changed the show's art style in the second season, making it look more like traditional Disney animation and toning down the urban cultural elements. They basically whitewashed their own show because the authentic representation was making them nervous. Despite having a dedicated fan base and decent ratings, Disney canceled American Dragon and has since made it nearly impossible to watch. The show's creator has revealed that Disney was never comfortable with how urban the series was and preferred their multicultural content to be more sanitized and less culturally specific. The show represented a brief moment when Disney was willing to authentically represent urban youth culture, but they quickly retreated back to safer, more generic content when they realized how different it made them look. The buzz on Maggie wrap. Your head around this. The buzz on Maggie got canceled for the most bizarre reason in Disney history, and it had nothing to do with ratings, quality, or audience reception. This show about a teenage fly navigating high school was actually performing well, but it got axed because of a corporate conspiracy involving toy sales, merchandise licensing, and Disney's relationship with other animation studios. Here's what really happened. The buzz on Maggie was created by Dave Polsky, who had previously worked on successful shows for other networks. Disney hired him to create something edgy and different, and the show was actually connecting with audiences who appreciated its unique humor and creative premise. But here's where it gets absolutely insane. Disney canceled the show because they realized that a cartoon about insects was impossible to merchandise effectively. Disney's entire business model depends on selling toys, clothing, and accessories based on their characters, but nobody wanted to buy Maggie the Fly plushies or action figures. The corporate executives discovered that shows featuring non-human characters that weren't cute animals or magical creatures were essentially worthless from a merchandising perspective. They could make millions selling Mickey Mouse ears and princess dresses, but fly-themed merchandise was a marketing nightmare. But the conspiracy goes deeper. Industry insiders have revealed that Disney was also pressured by other animation studios who were jealous of Disney's success and wanted to prevent them from expanding into more experimental content. There were behind-the-scenes negotiations involving distribution deals and licensing agreements that made continuing the buzz on Maggie politically complicated. The most chilling part? The show's creator has since revealed that Disney executives told him directly that the series was too creative and didn't fit their corporate strategy of producing content that could be easily franchised and monetized across multiple platforms. Disney has since completely erased the buzz on Maggie from their official history, and the show's creator was essentially blacklisted from working on major children's television projects. The conspiracy to kill creative, non-merchandisable content was so successful that Disney rarely takes risks on experimental shows anymore. So which forgotten Disney cartoon shocked you the most? Drop it in the comments and tell me if you actually remember watching any of these. Subscribe if you just realized your childhood had way more weird content than you thought. And remember, Disney's vault has way more secrets than they want you to know about.